Every weekday, roughly 9 million individual journeys are made on the Seoul Metropolitan Subway, more than the entire population of London, a single city, one transit network, 9 million trips before midnight. That number raises an uncomfortable question for cities in the West. How did a country that had almost no modern infrastructure in 1950 become home to what many transit experts now call the most functional urban rail system on the planet? The answer involves decades of deliberate policy, ruthless engineering standards, and a set of trade-offs that rarely make the headlines. This episode follows the money, the machines, and the choices that built something remarkable, and examines what it quietly demands in return. The Seoul Metropolitan Subway covers 9 lines operated by Seoul Metro, plus additional lines run by Korail and private operators, totaling over 350 stations across the greater capital region. According to the Seoul Metropolitan Government, the network spans roughly 920 kilometers of track, making it one of the 5 longest metro systems in the world by route length. A single base fare in 2024 sits at 1,400 Korean won, roughly $1, and that fare has not kept pace with inflation. The American Public Transportation Association consistently ranks Seoul near the top of global transit benchmarks for on-time performance, which hovers above 98%. Perhaps most striking, the average wait time on a central Seoul line during peak hours is under 3 minutes, a figure that transit authorities in New York and London have publicly acknowledged as a standard they cannot currently match. The Seoul subway did not emerge from a culture of spontaneous civic virtue. It was built under authoritarian urgency. Construction on Line 1 began in 1971 under President Park Chung-hee, who framed rapid transit as a matter of national security. A city paralyzed by traffic was a city vulnerable to crisis. The South Korean government channeled export revenues and foreign loans into infrastructure at a pace that liberal democracies rarely sustain. By the 1980s and 90s, successive administrations treated subway expansion as a visible proof of modernization, and construction timelines were enforced with the kind of top-down authority that left little room for delay. Engineering standards were imported from Japan and Germany, then refined domestically. The Korea Railroad Research Institute, established in 1996, became the engine of continuous technical improvement, testing everything from track vibration to air quality. Critically, land acquisition for station construction was handled swiftly through state powers that compressed what might take a Western city 15 years into 3 or 4. Operational excellence has a price that Seoul's balance sheets make visible. Seoul Metro reported cumulative deficits exceeding 5 trillion Korean won, roughly $3.7 billion by the early 2020s, driven largely by a politically sensitive fare structure that charges riders far below the cost of service. The Korea Transport Institute has documented that fare revenue covers only about 70% of operating costs, with the Seoul city government making up much of the difference through annual subsidies. An aging workforce compounds the pressure. Seoul Metro employs over 16,000 people, and a significant portion are approaching retirement, bringing pension obligations that planners describe as structurally unresolved. Safety infrastructure, while world-class, demands continuous reinvestment. Platform screen doors, automatic train control systems, and ventilation networks are not cheap to maintain. The city raised fares in 2023 for the first time in nearly a decade, triggering public debate that revealed how deeply Seoulites have come to treat cheap transit as an entitlement rather than a policy choice. Seoul's subway is not simply a transit story. It is a case study in what happens when a society decides, at the highest levels of government, that movement through a city is a public good worth subsidizing regardless of short-term cost. That choice produced something that genuinely works, but it also produced structural debt, suppressed fares, and a public expectation that is now extraordinarily difficult to revise. Cities in the United States and United Kingdom are currently debating how to fund transit expansions that Seoul built in a generation. The lesson from Seoul is not that authoritarianism builds good subways. It is that transit systems reflect the values a society is willing to enforce with money. When the political will exists and when it is sustained across administrations, the engineering follows. The harder question, The one Seoul is now grappling with is who pays when the bill finally arrives.